A body can lie perfectly still for hours, but in that old funeral home sometimes it moved. That was the whisper in the winter of 1823, a rumor that floated like smoke across Newcastle County, Pennsylvania, a place buried beneath frost pine trees and silence. There was a house on the edge of the woods. It was old even back then, flaking white paint and windows that looked like hollow eyes, watching the road, and every time someone passed, they swore they could feel it breathing. The Mertons lived. They're a family of 5 who ran the only funeral home for miles. They were undertakers by trade, caretakers of the dead. But they were not mourners. They never wept, never prayed. They simply watched as if they knew the dead better than the living. And one morning, when the ground was too hard to dig and the snow had fallen without sound, a man wandered into town, shaking with something deep in his bones. He said he saw shadows in the floorboards, said he heard something under the parlor where the dead were prepared, something scratching and slow like fingers dragging against wood. No one listened to him at first, not until they found the deputy's horse outside. The Merton place rained, snapped body, stiff eyes missing, and not a single track in the snow leading away, not until they dug up the dirt in the basement and pulled out body after body, frozen faces, wide open with mouths sewn shut and teeth missing. Clean 18 of them stacked like dolls, none of them buried, none of them named, and all perfectly preserved with skin as pale as milk and bones that looked too strong to be old people. Said it was disease, said it was madness, but no one had answers, not even the Mertons, who by then had vanished. Not a door open, not a window cracked. No trail, no note, nothing, just silence, and that house still standing as if it had never been touched. They called it a tragedy, but others knew it was something else. They remembered the screams at night, the way children cried without reason, the way no one ever saw the Mertons eat or sleep or speak more than a whisper. One child swore she saw the youngest Merton boy walking through the woods at dusk, holding something small in his hands, something that was crying, and when she looked again, he was gone, and all that was left was a trail of white teeth leading into the dark. They never solved it, never closed the case, never gave those bodies names or peace. And that funeral home still stands, still empty, still quiet, still watching, and some nights, if you stand real, still you can hear a voice in the wind, soft and low, and hungry there, not sleeping there, feeding. So the question remains, in that cold year of 1823, in a town that trusted too easily, in a family that seemed too quiet, what was really going on behind the closed doors of the Merton funeral home? Was it madness, a ritual, or was death itself just the beginning? And if those 18 bodies were only the ones they found, how many more are still waiting? How many more are still beneath us, listening, hungry, waiting to be remembered, or worse, waiting to come back? Asterisk. The town of Newcastle sat tucked between hills and hard soil, a mining settlement that breathed coal dust and coughed ash. Every winter was a test, every birth a boss. Risk, and every death a quiet sigh of relief. It was the kind of place where life moved slowly, where time didn't walk forward, but circled around the same routines, where people learned early that death was part of the deal, and they did not question it. So when the Merton family arrived in the autumn of 1819, they were welcomed not with open arms, but cautious nods and low stares. Strangers in a town that rarely accepted change. Jonathan Merton said he had trained as an apothecary in Boston, said he came here for the clean air, for a quieter life, after his wife's illness. Eloise was a silent woman, her face thin, her eyes never still, and always looking behind her, as if she expected something to follow. They brought their 3 sons, Nathaniel, Elias, and Jonah, pale boys with the same brown hair, same gray eyes, same way of speaking, slow, careful, like they were reading from a script. They bought a large colonial home at the forest's edge, turned it into a funeral parlor with a wrought iron sign that simply read Merton and Sons Undertakers. They took their work seriously, never late, never careless, dressed in black even on Sunday, never attended church, but always showed up for burials, standing still at the grave's edge until the last shovel of dirt was thrown. People said they were respectful, efficient, clean, that they made the dead look better than the living, and in a town like Newcastle, that was enough to earn trust. But even then there were whispers. Some said they never saw smoke from the chimney, even in winter. Some said the boys never aged, not in the way children do, and one man swore he saw all three boys walking the same road at night, without shoes, without speaking, without blinking. At first no one cared. Death came quickly in Newcastle mine, collapses, cholera outbreaks, barn fires and bad births. People died young and often, and the Mertons never refused a body, never asked questions, never charged more than a family could afford. They became part of the town's rhythm, and the townsfolk let them be until the burials started piling up. Too many too close together, and too many closed caskets. Records never added up, but few checked them and fewer spoke out, and those who didn't last long in town. There was the constable's assistant, a quiet man named Abram Wallace, who began asking why the graveyard filled so fast and why the ground near the Merton plots seemed too soft, like the earth refused to hold anything down there. He disappeared after telling the tavern keeper he was going to ask Jonathan some questions. Never returned, never wrote home, just gone like a candle blown out. That was the first time someone mentioned the phrase Merton curse. They said it with a laugh, but no one laughed. After dark, the house itself began to change its paint, peeling faster than it should, vines curling up its sides like fingers. The windows always dark, even at noon, and some nights people walking past heard music, a slow string tune with no melody. Just long dragging notes, like something trying to remember a lullaby. Children became afraid to walk near it even in daylight. And yet funerals continued, bodies continued to be delivered and buried, and the Mertons remained polite, quiet, helpful, never out of place. Some families began noticing strange things after the services. Jewelry missing from the dead, teeth replaced with porcelain, or worse, lips stitched closed even when the deceased had died peacefully. But grief makes people uncertain, and fear makes them silent, so no one spoke, and the Mertons carried on. Only one person tried to speak louder. Her name was Clara Winslow, a 12-year-old who swore she saw someone in the Merton attic window, someone too tall to be Jonah, too thin to be one of the brothers, and too pale to be alive. She told her teacher, who told the pastor, who told Clara's father, who beat her for making up stories. Week later, Clara wandered into the woods and came back different. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, just drew pictures over and over of teeth. Long rows of teeth with roots like tree branches and mouths stitched like prison bars. People began watching the funeral home again. This time, not with trust, but with dread, asterisk, because they finally realized what they should have seen from the start, that the Mertons didn't mourn with the town, didn't cry, didn't break, didn't bury their own dead, and that maybe they weren't here to care for the dead at all. Maybe they were here to learn from them too. Study them, or worse, to feed on them. But by the time those thoughts took root, it was already too late. The ground was already full. The air was already wrong, and the Mertons were already gone, asterisk. It began like most things do, with a quiet shift that no one noticed at first, a strange pattern, hiding behind familiar routines, a wrongness so subtle it blended with grief. The first sign was the singing, not loud, never clear, just a faint melody heard near the Merton property late at night, a humming that didn't stop even when the wind rose, or the animals scattered, a tune that always came from beneath the house, not above, not within, but deep down in the earth. Some said it was a child, others said it was a woman, but no one could agree on the words, and those who listened too long said they forgot where they were, or what they were doing, or why they were crying. Then came the sightings. Children claimed they saw someone walking behind the Merton home just beyond the tree line, a tall figure with skin so pale it shimmered in moonlight, someone who never turned around, but always stopped when spotted, always stood still like they were waiting for something or someone. One boy swore he saw Jonah digging in the frost near the back of the graveyard, not burying anything but digging it up, and when asked what he was doing, the boy simply said he was fixing things, fixing what his father had broken. The boy never spoke again after that, just stared at the floor, drawing circles over and over circles. With teeth in them, the town tried to move on, to ignore the unease, to trust in silence the way they always had. But then the funerals started to change. Caskets began to arrive, sealed shut. Even when the families asked for open viewings, the Mertons would shake their heads, gently say the body was not suitable for display, say there had been an accident, say the family should remember them whole and peaceful. Some believed them, others began to worry. One man, Hiram Plath, insisted on seeing his wife one last time, and when he forced open the coffin, what he found was not what he remembered. Her eyes were gone, her lips were sewn, her hands were missing. The tips of her fingers and her teeth had been pulled clean. He screamed until he lost his voice, tried to get someone to listen, but no one wanted to hear, not in that town, not in that year, not when death was easier to ignore than understand. 2 days later, Hiram was found dead in his barn, hung by his own belt with 2 small coins placed carefully over his eyes. After that, no one asked questions. No one dared. But the strange events kept coming. A group of boys who dared each other to knock on the Merton door swore they saw something through the side window. Not a person, not exactly, but a body suspended in the air, limbs hanging loose like marionette strings, eyes wide and mouth stretched as if screaming but making no sound when the boys returned. The next day, the window was gone, sealed over with new wood, painted fast and sloppy, like someone wanted it gone before anyone else saw. Then Jonah was seen again, this time alone in the woods, holding something wrapped in cloth, something that dripped red through the bottom as he walked. He stopped when he saw the woman on the trail, smiled, and said, "They never let me help before, but now they let me now, they say. I'm ready." The woman turned and ran, but by the time she reached the road, she could no longer remember what she'd seen, only that her feet were bleeding and her ears were ringing with the sound of humming. People began to leave Newcastle. Slowly at first, families packing in the night wagons, rolling out before dawn, always without farewell, always without reason. The graveyard kept growing, but the town kept shrinking, and still the Mertons stayed, still the parlor lights never turned off. Still, the chimney burned without end, even when no smoke rose from the fire. Then came the night. The dogs went silent. Every dog in town stopped barking at the same time and didn't make a sound until morning. And when the sun rose, someone noticed the back door of the Merton funeral home was open just a crack, just enough to see that something had been dragged inside, something heavy, something that left a trail. But no one dared to look. The next morning, another grave had been dug, and another family was told there would be no viewing. They didn't argue, no one did anymore, because by then, the town understood what they had allowed to grow, what they had allowed to stay hidden behind politeness and fear and the blind acceptance of death. They understood that whatever the Mertons were doing, it was not holy, it was not natural, and it was not done. And the worst part was not knowing if it had only just begun. Asterisk. The house sat quiet for days after the last funeral. No smoke, no movement, no sign of the Mertons. Just the sound of wind through dry leaves and a strange smell that never went away. Not rot, not fire, something else, something chemical and sharp like medicine gone wrong. It was the grave robbers who uncovered the truth. 2 men from out of town, hungry, desperate, hoping to sell jewelry or clothes from the dead. They broke in through the cellar windows one night and never came back out, not whole, not really. One was found a week later wandering the woods barefoot and mumbling, covered in scratches that spelled out names across his arms, names that matched the missing names that should have been in the cemetery, but weren't. Other was never found, just his coat torn to shreds and soaked through with something that looked like blood, but shimmered like oil. Word spread fast, even faster than fear, and by the time the sheriff arrived, half the town had gathered near the Merton home, though no one dared get close, not even the dogs. not even the birds. What they found beneath the floorboards changed everything. 18 bodies, all laid out in a perfect circle, their limbs carefully folded, their faces frozen in wide-eyed expressions of horror or ecstasy, or both, as if caught between two different worlds. None of the bodies showed signs of rot. Not one muscle slack, not one vein collapsed. They looked almost alive. Except for the mouths sewn shut, and the teeth missing, every last one pulled with care, placed into small velvet pouches that were hidden. Beneath the altar upstairs, one of the officers vomited the moment he opened the first pouch. The teeth were still warm somehow, and the velvet was damp with something that smelled like sweat and salta. Doctor from Philadelphia was brought in to examine the scene, a man named Frederick Clements, who had studied anatomy for 15 years, and he wrote one note before leaving town forever. He wrote, "The skin is not natural. The veins are wrong, and the eyes move when you stand too close." He never said more, and no one saw him again. Inside the embalming room, they found journals, pages and pages of notes written in two different hands, Jonathan and Eloise, both recording the same details with different tongues. Jonathan wrote about preservation, about memory. He believed the dead could be held in time, their thoughts stored in the roots of their teeth, their identities frozen and replayed if the right rituals were used. Eloise wrote about hunger. She believed the dead weren't dead, just paused, just waiting to be fed the right offering to wake them, to bring them forward into something cleaner, something more permanent than flesh. There were diagrams of the skull showing how to drill without breaking bone, how to extract memory pulp from molars, how to whisper names into the jaw to bring back voices from before the grave. There was a list of the 18 with ages and causes of death, none of which matched public records. Several had been listed as drowned or lost in mining accidents. But here, they were with no signs of trauma, no signs of burial. Youngest was 6 years old. The oldest was nearly 90. All had been marked, all had been prepared for something no one could explain. And in the corner of the room, there was a mirror covered in black cloth. Behind it were handprints, dozens, maybe more, pressed into the glass from the inside, not the outside. And some of the prints had fingernails missing. The sheriff ordered the place sealed, but no one stayed behind to watch it. No one wanted to, no one volunteered. And by morning, the bodies were gone, everyone. No broken locks, no open doors, just empty boards and cold earth, and the smell of lavender soaked into every wall like perfume at a funeral that had lasted too long. One of the constables said he saw someone leaving the house that night, said it looked like Nathaniel Merton, but older, thinner. His eyes sunk deep into his face, and his skin stretched too tight across his skull. Said he didn't walk, he glided. Said he smiled, but no one believed him. No one wanted to, because if he was telling the truth, then it meant the Mertons had never been working with the dead. They had been working through them. The house was burned 3 days later by men with torches and trembling hands. They said it was for peace. They said it was for closure. But some said the fire didn't burn right. The flames turned blue, and the smoke never rose, just hovered low across the ground like fog, like breath. The fire ended before the house was gone. The top floors collapsed, but the cellar remained untouched, and no one ever went back, except sometimes children wander too far and come home with pockets full of teeth, teeth too old to be theirs, teeth too white to be forgotten. And every once in a while someone swears. They hear a humming on the wind, a soft tune without words and without end, something that sounds like waiting, something that sounds like remembering. Asterisk, Newcastle was never the same after they opened that house. Even those who never stepped inside could feel it. The weight of what had been uncovered, the sense that something beneath their town had. And watching them all along, waiting not for justice, not for discovery, but for acknowledgement, the ground felt different, colder, softer, like it might open up and take them too if they stood too long in one place. Children stopped playing outside even. In the daylight, they stuck close to doorways and windows, holding their breath whenever the wind blew from the direction of the Wood's one mother said her daughter wouldn't sleep unless she checked her teeth every night, counted each one with a finite one. Mirror and the candle terrified they would vanish if she closed her eyes too long. Another boy dug holes in the backyard until his hands bled, whispered to his father that he was trying to bury something inside him before it got out, said he felt it moving behind his ribs. The pastor left town without notice, left the church unlocked and the pews filled with muddy footprints, as if someone had walked in soaked and alone and never left. People started forgetting things, names, faces, even whole days. Gone like smoke, one man forgot the name of his dead wife, and when he looked through her photo album, he said the faces had changed. None of them were smiling anymore, and some had no mouths at all. There were whispers that grief had curdled into madness. But it wasn't grief, not exactly. It was something more hollow, something colder, a silence that followed everyone home and made the floorboards creak even when no one moved. Funerals became rushed, quiet things no longer held in the church. No longer held at all. Sometimes people just disappeared, and no one asked where they had gone. No one asked if they had died or if they had been taken, because the town had lost something. Deeper than people, deeper than peace, it had lost trusting the ground in their neighbors, in the air itself. No one trusted the earth to keep secrets anymore, and no one trusted death to be. Finally, a woman named Agnes, who had lost her husband in the mine, collapsed. Said she heard him walking through their house at night, said she could feel the weight of his boots on the stairs, but when she checked, there were no footprints, just loose teeth lined up carefully on the floor in front of the nursery. She left that same night barefoot and shaking her hand wrapped in cloth to stop them from trembling. She was never seen again. Another man burned all his family's portraits, claimed he saw someone else standing in them, someone wearing his brother's skin but smiling too wide, someone whose eyes looked exactly like Nathaniel Merton. Town doctor tried to make sense of it, tried to help, but he stopped sleeping, stopped eating, and then stopped speaking entirely. He was last seen staring into a mirror with his mouth wide open and a pair of pliers in his hand. The mirror shattered, but no one heard the sound. By spring, half the town had fled. The rest remained behind out of fear or stubbornness or something darker. They lived quietly, avoided questions, avoided the woods, avoided eye contact at funerals, and locked every door twice, even the ones inside their own homes. One night the church bell rang at midnight. No one was there. No wind, no reason, just the sound ringing out over the rooftops, followed by silence that felt like a held breath. The next day they found 17 small holes dug around the cemetery, each one the size of a child's grave, each one empty. No one dared fill them, and no one spoke of it again. Even years later, the survivors never told the whole truth, only fragments and mutterings and prayers, whispered through cracked lips, prayers not for safety, but for stillness, for quiet, for the thing beneath them to stay asleep. But the worst part, the part no one could explain, was what they began to feel in themselves. The way they couldn't cry anymore, not real tears, the way laughter felt like it didn't belong to them, the way they sometimes woke up with the taste of lavender and blood in their mouths and no memory of sleep. One woman said she felt like someone had stitched something into her chest, something heavy, something sharp. She went to sleep one night holding a crucifix and never woke up. Her body found curled up in the church pews, her mouth filled with twine and her hands folded around her own teeth. They buried her in silence. No sermon, no hymns, no headstone. Just dirt, because by then they all knew the Mertons hadn't just stolen bodies or lives. They had stolen the ability to grieve, to feel, to move on. Whatever they had done beneath that house, whatever rituals or experiments or hunger they had fed, it had rooted itself in the town like mold, beneath wallpaper, growing in silence, feeding on memory and fear and sorrow, and it would never be clean again, never be whole, only haunted. The fire was supposed to end it, but it didn't, not really. It only scattered the questions into smoke. The Cellar never burned. The stone walls stood untouched, the floor damp, but cold, not scorched like something had. Rejected the fire, turned it away, and left everything below still whole. Still waiting. After that, nothing was certain, not time. Not facts, not memories. Investigators came from Harrisburg and Philadelphia, men in wool coats and heavy boots carrying ledgers and measuring tape and solemn faces. They took statements from the townspeople, asked about the Mertons, about the bodies, about the strange preservation. But the answers were always different, sometimes conflicting, sometimes impossible. One man claimed the bodies had no scent at all, no smell of decay, no chemical trace of embalming, just a sharp sweetness like overripe fruit rotting from the inside out. Another said he saw the teeth twitch when the lantern light hit them just right, like nerves were still alive, just buried too deep to scream. Theories rose and fell like ash. The first was the simplest and the most comfortable. The Mertons were mad, family consumed by grief or illness or some strange inbred delirium. They had become obsessed with death and preservation and control, and in their madness, they had mutilated the dead, convinced they were scientists or saviors or gods. It made sense on paper, easy to write down, easy to forget, but there was no record of mental illness in either Jonathan or Eloise's family, no history of delusions or violence, and the calm precision of their notes and journals told a different story, not one of confusion, but of intention. That's where the second theory took root. The occult theory. A few officers found strange symbols carved into the basement walls, symbols not in English or German or Latin. Some looked almost like teeth, others like eyes open and staring. A circle appeared again and again, with marks around the edge like time or moons or jaws. Unhinged. A language maybe, or a ritual map there, or old books on the property. Thick leather volumes that seemed hand-stitched, filled with drawings of mouths sewn shut and skulls cracked open with instructions on how to whisper into the bone, how to preserve a soul inside a tooth, how to feed a body memory instead of blood. The investigators brought in a man from a theological seminary, a quiet old scholar named Edward Brandt, who specialized in forbidden texts. He reviewed the journals and carvings and left the next morning without speaking. He mailed a single page back to the sheriff a week later. It said, "Do not disturb what cannot rot." Was never heard from again. Then came the third theory, the one people still whisper in secret, the one that crawls under the skin and won't come out, that the Mertons were not keeping the dead, they were feeding them. There's a story buried in some of the journals, too broken to read fully but clear in its intent, a story about something old, something beneath the earth, something that sleeps in cold soil and drinks for memory, something that feeds on loss and grows inside grief, like a tumor with teeth. The journal called it. The devourer said, "It speaks only through mouths that know longer breathe." Said its hunger can be soothed but never satisfied, and if you give it enough memories, if you feed it enough moments, enough pain, it will give something back. Not life, not quite, but something close, something useful, something obedient. Some believe the Mertons made a deal, promised the devourer offerings in exchange for preservation or power, or maybe just understanding. Maybe they wanted to stop time, to trap death itself. Maybe they just wanted to never feel sorrow again. Either way, the rituals they performed weren't random. Every tooth taken, every stitch placed had purpose, and the placement of those 18 bodies wasn't for storage, it was for worship. Some even think there were more than 18, that those were just the successful ones, the ones that almost woke. There's another theory, darker still, that the Mertons weren't the first, that they had learned these rites from somewhere else, from someone else. Maybe generations ago, maybe from something they dug up in the mines or found in the forest, something buried in roots and bone. One of the miners claimed before he died that he found a tunnel beneath shaft 6, a tunnel lined with human teeth pressed into the walls like bricks. Said he followed it for miles until he heard something breathing behind the stone, and he ran, and he never went back. No map ever showed that tunnel, and no one could prove it existed. But that shaft collapsed a month later, and the ground above it still smells faintly of lavender. Even in winter, the truth is no one knows for sure what the Mertons were doing or how long they had been doing it or what they might have brought back with them from wherever they came from. The house is gone, but the cellar remains sealed in concrete. Now, by order of the state, the land fenced and locked, but still drawing curiosity like a wound that hasn't closed. Some say the bodies were taken back by whatever they were meant for. Others say they walked down on their own. There are reports even now sightings in the woods of pale figures moving too fast to follow, and children speaking in voices that don't belong to them, and the occasional discovery of a single tooth placed neatly on a doorstep or fence post as if left behind by something that had been fed and was saying thank you, or maybe asking for more asterisk. Time moved on, but the story never left. The cellar was sealed, the land declared cursed and condemned, the town itself dissolved piece by piece. Houses, emptied roads, cracked weeds grew taller than fences, and the mapmakers eventually stopped marking Newcastle at all. But the story remained not in history books or newspapers, but in whispers in roadside bars and forgotten basements, in old women's prayers and children's warnings carved into tree bark behind schoolyards. She say, if you walk the old path at night, you can still hear it, not footsteps, not voices, something softer, the sound of breath rising from the earth, like steam, and if you stop, if you listen, it starts to sound like humming, always the same tune, always the same rhythm, like a lullaby, too old to remember and too dangerous to forget. Some say the Mertons never died, they simply changed, folded themselves into something else, something the earth could carry without rotting, something that could wait without aging. Others say they were only vessels themselves, puppets of something deeper, something ancient that fed through them, not on flesh, not on blood, but on memory, on pain, on everything that makes a person real. Some people still visit the site, mostly thrill seekers, mostly skeptics. They never stay long. Some leave with nothing, some leave with dreams they can't explain, but every so often one doesn't leave at all. Are only waiting for you to knock?